Hi, and welcome to today's episode of the Plot Luck podcast. We'll be posting twice a month. The first episode will be a spoiler-free version. In the second episode, we talk about the book with full spoilers. I'm Louise, and I have a YouTube channel over at Foxes and Fairy Tales.
And I'm Susan. You can find me most places at Does Susan Write. You can find all our links in the description.
In today's episode, we're going to talk about Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is her latest release. It is a historical adult novel set in the 1980s and looking at astrophysicists at NASA.
So, Louise, this book was my choice, and this is the second book that I have chosen. The reason I chose this book was because I have read a fair number of Taylor Jenkins Reid's books, and I know that you have read and loved one.
Yes.
So I thought there's a chance here that Louise might like it, and there's a good chance that I will like it. I will say I didn't know anything about it apart from the name. So I was a little bit perplexed that I'd chosen a book about space. I kind of thought, Atmosphere, Taylor Jenkins Reid writes about celebrities and people in the limelight. It's bound to be about an actor on stage or a musician or something. And I was wrong.
Because you had picked the book, obviously I looked it up a little bit more before I started reading it. So I did know that it was going to be about astronauts, but I will be honest, I thought it might be more about astronauts by way of them being celebrities rather than just the kind of astronaut side of it. I thought we might be seeing the publicity and the hype and things around big space missions or whatever.
Yes, and I think that's maybe something we should come back to talk about a little bit later on, because that is a really interesting way of looking at Taylor Jenkins Reid's books overall. So Louise, I know that you've done a little bit of research about Taylor Jenkins Reid and her career. Would you like to share it with the class?
It's really interesting that although Taylor Jenkins Reid's books are all different, they do have that kind of theme running through them, as fame is really important to them. She did have 4 books came out before 2017, but in 2017 she released The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which is the one I read, and it's the one that I really saw her kind of explode out. It seemed to be the book of the moment that year. She talks about kind of golden age Hollywood. And then 2019 she done Daisy Jones and the Six. 2021 she had Malibu Rising. 2022 she had Carrie Soto Is Back, and now obviously Atmosphere. So she's been releasing them fairly quickly, and they're all on a vaguely fame related topic.
So I've read a couple more of Taylor Jenkins Reid's books than you have. First I was actually Daisy Jones and the Six, which then led me into The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, then Malibu Rising, and then Carrie Soto Is Back. I did try and read one of her earlier books. I borrowed it from a friend who hated every minute of it. I got about a chapter in, thought, this book isn't for me. So I do think she's an author who's almost in her second writing career, because her first books are very different from the sort of fame-centred books.
Yeah, she's maybe found, I guess, her
niche.
Yeah, she's found her niche and what works for her.
I think that she used to write for Rolling Stone magazine.
Which feels like it tracks.
Yeah, a lot of her books seem inspired by real-life celebrities, and I think that's a really interesting topic to talk about in the context of this book, because in her other books I could see at least one person or band or whatever who had inspired her. But I don't know anything about astronauts, so I don't know. So the kind of fame versus role models, almost like the female astronauts are very obviously role models, and would that give them fame within their community?
Yeah, I suppose it depends where your interests lie. I'd imagine if you're particularly interested in science or space, especially children, if that is your phase that you go through, then maybe they are famous a little bit. But I think in adult world, musicians and actors are always going to get a lot more publicity. They're more likely to be famous.
There was very clearly, in the book and in real life, it's that responsibility on women in STEM to not mess it up, because if they do, another woman won't get a chance.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking that as I was saying it, that the fame angle, part of that is probably related to it's women in a science-based career in the 80s, whereas the other books, again, without having read them, things like singers and actresses, yes, there's sexism and everything, of course, happening in those industries too, but there's not maybe this same level of, if you mess this up, nobody else gets a chance, because there's been plenty of female rock stars and singers that have messed up, and we get the next generation coming through because there's such a mass appeal, whereas astronauts and science and everything, it's a much more niche career, so maybe there's more pressure on the few that do kind of end up at that arrow point.
Yeah, I think I like to bring capitalism into things, but you see, if you look at girl bands, most of their audience is young girls. And if you look at boy bands, most of their audience is young girls. So in celebrity industries, a lot of the consumers are young girls, whereas in science, in the tech industries...
Yeah, I mean, there may be more the again, without getting too general, but I would imagine that the kind of person, the kind of teenager or child that's going to look up to astronauts and scientists still probably is going to be a boy. And again, that thing of still tends to be that most boys and most men are more interested in and are more able to relate to other men. There's that thing still, I think it's still true in like films, that women can relate to films about men, but men can't relate to films about women. And that's why you tend to think of the male protagonist as being the blank slate that everyone can relate to. It's the universal character. Whereas if you make it a woman, you'll automatically lose half your audience. So there's maybe some of that coming through as well, that celebrities in male-dominated industries just doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, I think I would probably take that one step further and say white men.
Yeah.
Because there's a lack of diversity in films as well. But what I would also say is there still needs to be female actresses, because who are the male actors' characters going to impress otherwise in a sort of...
Well, I mean, they manage quite well in a few of the films that are especially biopics, and they'll just be like, this man that did a great thing, and I guess some women existed nearby him roughly at that time. And you're like, how are there no women in this entire world, in his entire life? And they just go, oh, I mean, he had 3 wives. But they don't matter enough to feature in this 4-hour biopic. The man who's only doing the job.
And is also not taking any responsibility for, if they make a mistake, that's on them. It's not on the rest of the men.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
There's a lot of
men
pressure.
get to be kind of
autonomous,
exceptional
and unique.
failures.
Yeah.
And we don't say, oh, well, that movie was bad. I think maybe movies with men just aren't successful. I think there's what's at the moment, the Neutron movie, which has kind of floundered and failed. And it's like the 3rd Jared Leto movie to do badly. And I saw someone talking on the internet about going, I think we just need to accept that movies with men just aren't successful. And it's like you would never do it. You'd go, oh, Jared Leto's had a couple of bad films, but obviously he'll get another big role. Whereas one movie with one woman isn't successful, and we go, oh, women just can't carry the lead.
Yeah.
Like, women don't get to be exceptional. They're representing the entire gender.
Yeah, they have to be exceptional on behalf of everybody.
Yeah.
Not just on themselves, which is a huge pressure. It's one thing in the entertainment industry, but as an astronaut, in terms of organisations in engineering, quite easy for them to have maybe 1 or 2 token women as the secretaries.
Yeah, a lot of that's happening behind closed doors. If we're talking about films and media, then everyone can see that. You can go, this film had 1 female character in it. Whereas, who knows, I mean, I'm sure people do know, but as a general rule, like a lay person, I couldn't have told you what the makeup of the last moon mission was.
I wouldn't know.
And making our point about the men versus women thing, more specifically, as someone who really, all I know about the spaceships is they fly up into the space. That's, you know, I don't know anything. The only astronauts' names I can tell you are male astronauts. Yeah. Like, I couldn't tell you a female astronaut's name.
No, and I think to take this back to your kind of childhood, you know, you're saying a lot of boys enjoy space. I actually studied physics, and I was one of 3 girls in my class, and it was a full class. I felt very isolated because there was an assumption I would sit with the girls. I didn't want to sit with the girls because we had nothing in common.
Yeah, I think there's an assumption that just being women is enough to give you a commonality, whereas you wouldn't assume that the entire class of boys will talk to each other just because they're boys. You completely expect that they're going to form their own little cliques because, oh, these are the boys that are interested in X and these are the boys that are interested in Y, whereas the girls are just the girls.
Yeah, and I had to adjust my behaviour to fit in with them. And just imagine if they hadn't done that, me and my friend could be astronauts by now. And we could be the role models for the next generation, and everybody could know of female astronauts.
So, kind of staying on that topic a little bit, we've been pretty clear that we are both complete laymen, complete newbies when it comes to talking about astronomy and astrology and astronauts. Without giving any spoilers, how did you think that Taylor Jenkins Reid handled those quite technical topics and kept the book, or did she keep the book, accessible for people like us who maybe don't know any of that terminology?
Without giving too many spoilers away, I was bored out my brain. I think that's not what I go to fiction for. You know, I like to be entertained when I'm reading fiction. I don't want to make notes.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to read the story and not get taken away from it trying to understand something that I don't understand.
See, it's not that I'm going to argue the opposite. What I found with the book was that, without knowing anything about space, I would be interested to know what someone who does know about the subject felt and how well it was represented, because I thought she gave it a veneer of space and astrology and whatever. I don't know that they went into enough depths that I believe, as someone that doesn't know anything, I was convinced that the characters knew that much more than me.
See, I felt it was over-researched.
The only thing that I felt that I had any kind of understanding, any level of coming in that, on when they were talking about the constellations and they were talking about the different stars and the Orion's belt and that side of it. And at that point, it felt a little bit like a Wikipedia article rather than the level of knowledge that I expect an astrophysicist to have. Because I know that obviously the actual, the mythology behind the star signs isn't directly relevant to her job. But they knew a little bit, and she clearly had an interest, and that's what they were bonding over in that moment. And I just didn't feel like that character, I was convinced, knew the level to which I think someone that spent their life studying space knows these stories.
So interesting, because that's the same part that annoyed me. And it annoyed me because it felt preachy. It felt like the author, who I love, was saying, look at what I have learned.
Yeah, see, I wonder whether this kind of maybe brings us back around to what we were saying about Taylor Jenkins Reid having been a journalist in, I think you said Rolling Stone.
Yes.
Because, again, I've not read Daisy Jones and the Six, but from what you've said, it seems like her world building there is very strong. It's very immersive. And that's definitely what I got with Evelyn Hugo. Again, I don't know that much about Golden Age Hollywood, but when I read Evelyn Hugo, there were moments when I think I listened to it. I was listening to it, and I would suddenly go, oh, that dress sounds gorgeous. I wonder if I can look up what that dress looks like. You know, I wonder if it's in exhibits anywhere. Or I wonder if I could look up her Wikipedia page and see and then I would go, she's not real, Louise. What are you, I would genuinely have, a fraction of a second, but I would genuinely have a moment where I would go, I could look that up, because she sold me so well that this was a real person that had been around in this time period, and I could go back and look at her back catalogue. And I wonder if, because of that and Daisy Jones were in the world that she's been immersed in through her career, she has a level of understanding that then when it comes to astronauts with the best will in the world, she can do loads of research. I'm not saying she didn't research the book, but she doesn't have that intrinsic understanding that feels like it bleeds through the other books effortlessly.
There's a lack of nuance almost, isn't it?
This just felt a little bit more like a little bit more of the showing of the homework.
Yes.
Because she had to make a point of putting it in.
I agree.
It didn't feel as effortless as it has in some of her other books.
Yes, and I think it's very difficult because authors have to do research, obviously. But I prefer it when I don't see the research, and I feel like I just saw the research too much.
And it is a tricky one, because at the same time, if a lot of the ease of the world building has come from her own experience, you're then stuck where she's written, 2 or 3 books in that world. Would you rather, as a reader, your favourite author, would you rather they're putting out things that are new and fresh and different, or do you just want them to rewrite the same book 10 times? Because that's really then her choices. If the choice is right about what she knows or research other things, you then I mean, and some people, it depends. Some authors do the same book 10 times and their readers love it. And other authors, you're like, no, I don't want to see them rehash the same story.
Yeah, and I think as well, I don't know how much you know about the other 4 books, not the ones that are more popular, I would say. There's tiny wee Easter eggs. So characters sometimes appear or events happen, so it's like one world. Whereas I didn't see that in this book.
This felt very self-contained because that's something, I mean, it's not really what we're talking about, but it's something I did feel with the book. I felt a little bit, I don't know, what is it, White Room Syndrome? Not so much in the literal descriptions, but the world. I felt that we were watching what was happening in this little bubble, and I didn't really get a massive sense of the world that was going on around the book.
It was institutionalised.
So,
It felt like, like a school or a hospital setting where this is your bubble,
yeah,
and you're not really going out with that.
Yeah.
And when you are, it's just like the non-playable characters are sort of
yeah,
around
exactly. It
about.
felt like the rest of the world hadn't fully rendered.
Yeah.
And so I don't know whether maybe that leads to that feeling as well of it doesn't lend itself to having little cameos and little mentions, whether putting those in might have helped flesh that world out, but the setting felt a little bit isolated, and like you're saying, that makes sense then if the rest of the books are more interconnected.
And then, sorry, taking this to a ridiculous deeper level, is that intentional because these are literally the people who are going out of the world?
Yeah, and I guess, again, if we're going to be really like meta about it, they are relatively isolated in their career. It's a career that you become very focused on. That is a point that we'll get to probably when we talk spoilers, but it is a very isolating career that demands you give it everything and you do exclude other aspects of your life. Whereas her books that are about celebrities, they're very forward-facing, they're very public-facing, they're very out there. That is one where you're bringing the world very much into you. So maybe this has been a work of absolute genius and she's taken things just beyond what I, as a reader, am able to kind of keep up with.
Yeah. I think that's sometimes why there's benefit in coming into these podcasts blind, because when we talk, we influence each other a little bit. I am going to ask you a question about space and being in space, etc. What do you think of Katy Perry and her space expedition?
I see when you were like, about being in space, I was genuinely expecting some kind of fact check moment, and I was like, Susan, I don't know, we've just been through this, no.
Come on. As if I would do that.
No, you have brought it around nicely, though, to the celebrity thing, and also, not to be mean, but like where I assume your level of interest in space travel hits bang on. This is to no surprise, again, the thing of the different interests. It doesn't surprise me that space travel, your thing is, so did you see Katy Perry? And I'm going to come in with my thing about, like, celebrities, I don't. So they went up, yeah? They went up and they came back down, is all I...
So they went up, and they weren't up for very long, and her child, I believe, is called Daisy, so she had a Daisy, and she took kind of film of her into the camera with the Daisy, and you think, you've got a minute? Look at Earth.
I would be interested how those particular celebrities were picked as well. Katy Perry is just such a, like, strange choice. I don't know who I would pick instead. They're not there as the scientist, they're there for the publicity, almost. Or, I mean, realistically, that's why she was there, as the publicity. But I still think there would be celebrities who feel more fitting than Katy Perry. Why Katy Perry as opposed to Taylor Swift? Or,
Sabrina Carpenter.
Yeah, if we're just going with, pop star, what was the logic of it being her rather than someone else? So moving away from things we know absolutely nothing about, something we could talk about a little bit is the setting of this, because the setting is interesting in that we are doing another historical. What did you think of the representation of the 80s, either from, if you have any memories of that far back, and maybe more so how we're seeing the 80s represented in modern media nowadays?
Yeah, so without giving too much away, I do have some memories from the 80s because I'm a little bit older than you. Not a huge amount,
no,
but enough. So for me, I know we talked last time about in a bit Miss.
Oh, Bury
Bare
our
Bones and the
our
Midnight
bones.
Soil.
I keep calling it Bury your bones as if I'm just being very threatening.
Yeah.
But Bury our bones in the midnight soil.
Yeah,
was
and
our last month.
we had talked about how the timing felt off. So
yes.
I had resonated with
The house parties.
yes, which were set in the mid 2000s, but felt mid 90s to me.
Yeah, we couldn't quite get a handle on the timeline because I think we were talking, was it Alice? She's meant to be a college student now.
Yes.
And we were like, well, the house parties she would have went to felt more like something you remember, where even at my age, I would have said we didn't do that as much. It was...
Yeah, and just the structure of them and the lack of texting all the time. It just was
the historical thing felt a little bit
just
out
a
of time.
tiny bit. But I guess that is, again, for someone who is maybe 25, they wouldn't get that because they didn't live through it.
Yeah, there's a difference between what you experience and what you research.
Yeah.
But also, I guess the thing with Bebitmas, specifically those scenes were that they were set in Scotland, so we would be having a slightly different comparison because you're comparing like for like. Whereas in this, her description of the 80s isn't necessarily the 80s we experienced because this is America in the 80s.
Absolutely. So I would say, for me, the representation of the 80s here is what I would remember watching on TV that was a representation of the early 70s. So it felt misaligned, but in the opposite direction of Bebitmas. So I kind of felt it was difficult for me to see this as being set in the 80s because it felt 70s to me. And I guess it'd be quite interesting to compare this book to other media that's set in the 80s because it seems like the 80s is now vintage and back in fashion.
I hate to tell you, but it definitely is vintage because the 90s are vintage.
So the 2000s, the
So
early
like,
2000s,
so I mean, I hate to tell you,
Y2K.
but the 80s are definitely vintage. It would be interesting though to compare because the 80s are having a bit of a moment. A couple of years ago, the 80s was massively back, especially in like fashion, probably because Stranger Things was having whatever its last season was, and that's been hugely popular. And I think the 80s element of that has played onto it a lot. Like, I think obviously Stranger Things has its plot and its characters and everything, but I do think the aesthetic of Stranger Things and that 80s nostalgia really has fed into why it's been so popular. And I wonder whether sometimes with that, is it people that were that age in the 80s? Or is it people that are maybe slightly younger? So like you're talking maybe people that were born in the mid-90s and never actually experienced the 80s, but you're getting this kind of almost idealised fantasy 80s world comes through in Stranger Things. Because this, I would say, isn't a massively romanticised version of the 80s. We're not hitting all poodle perm, and then she was wearing her ankle warmers, and like she doesn't throw in loads and loads and loads of like very iconically 80s moments, which sometimes I feel like things set in the 80s that are written now do, more visually obviously than books, but sometimes you get the thing of every single person had a poodle perm and every single person was wearing neon, and maybe because what I think of the 80s is almost a caricature of the 80s. So I don't know whether that's something as well.
Yeah, potentially. I know we've already mentioned the cultural difference, but the world was a very different place. We didn't have the internet, so trends happened at different times in different parts of the world. And I think looking at Stranger Things, there are definitely elements of Stranger Things that I can see and resonate with, like going out on your bike all day. That did happen. That is not a myth. In the summer, even in Scotland where we don't get a lot of sunshine, you would go out all day, you'd come home when you were hungry or when the streetlights went on.
But yeah, I just thought that this, like you said, it didn't feel massively 80s for me. But yeah, I didn't get a huge sense of the 80s coming through. But I didn't get a big sense of the outside world at all coming through. It felt like that little insular bubble rather than the world in general. So obviously, we're trying to keep this episode as spoiler-free as possible, and I get the sense we're starting to want to talk more specifically about the book in relation to the setting and space, things like that. So I think what we'll do is we will pull back here. I will read the blurb from the back of the book just so that if you have not read the book and you are interested in joining us for the next episode, you have a little bit of a better idea than Susan did. In the summer of 1980, astrophysics professor Joan Goodwin begins training to be an astronaut at Houston's Johnson Space Center alongside an exceptional group of fellow candidates. Top Gun pilot Hank Redmond, mission specialists John Griffin and Lydia Danes, warm-hearted Donna Fitzgerald, and Vanessa Ford, the magnetic and mysterious aeronautical engineer. As the new astronauts prepare for their first flights, Joan finds a passion and a love she never imagined and begins to question everything she believes about her place in the observable universe. Then, in December of 1984, on mission STS-LR9, everything changes in an instant. We'll be back in a fortnight to talk more specifically about some of the things we've touched on in Atmosphere.
Full spoilers.
Full spoilers.
See you next time.
Bye.